Better to remain silent and be thought a fool. A ninja story. Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Legality. I'm your host, Richard Hoeg, managing member of the Hoeg Law business law firm of Northville, Michigan. And today I think we've got a fairly short episode of Virtual Legality. Those of you who follow the channel know that whenever I say that, it's inevitably 40 minutes, but I don't think so today. And as you probably know if you follow this series, we do a lot of deep dives into legal language, into statutory code, into other things that are somewhat difficult to get through, that are very technically oriented. But on the other hand, we also talk about something that I'm very interested in, that I'm constantly consulting my clients about, and that is messaging, controlling one's brand. In particular, from my neck of the woods, dealing with crisis and trying to talk through those crises with the media, with employees, with other interested parties. Now, that's not the case here, but I thought we could all kind of learn from some of the things that are happening out in the world. And I love Twitter. I like to be on Twitter. I like to talk about things like Michigan football on Twitter. And unfortunately, if you're listening to this, it's the day after Michigan got its now annualized beatdown from Ohio State. More power to them. I'm kind of used to it at this point. But if you saw that on national television, I personally apologize for my Michigan Wolverines. They didn't do a great job of making that a close or interesting game. But during that game, and I'm not so certain that the actual tweet that we're going to discuss today isn't about that game. During that game, our field goal kicker, after a touchdown, missed an extra point. Now, if you're not familiar with the game of American football, basically when you score a touchdown, when you drive the football into the end zone, you get 6 points, and then you get a bonus point for kicking the ball through the uprights from a very close position to that end zone. It's very rare for kickers to miss extra points, but not impossible. I think their kick rate is something like 98 or 97%, especially in college where it's closer than it is in the pros. But what happened after this miss, and it might have been related to a different football game, there's a lot of football games on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, is that leading light Ninja, the pro gamer of pro gamers, one of the main people that you hear about when you're talking about professional video gaming, because he is so popular, because he has a channel on Twitch or now on Mixer after he signed a big endorsement deal to switch over, and he's on the cover of ESPN the magazine, and all these various other things. He is a brand manager, and I don't want to take that away from him. These age of the influencer types, these people that stream video games or that otherwise have Instagram followings where they sell products to their followers, these are entrepreneurial individuals. They are in charge of their brand management, and in general, they're very, very good at it. But yesterday, Ninja wasn't so good at it, and that's what I want to talk to you about a little bit. I've actually got my tweet pulled up where I said, I honestly understand why some folks hate gaming and players at this moment. Thanks, Ninja, for the clarity. And we're going to take a look at his tweets, but suffice it to say, if you haven't watched a lot of the channel, if you only came and subscribed to this based on, for instance, my COPPA videos, where I know a lot of people wound up subscribing, one of the things that Virtual Legality likes to touch on is items in the news or out in public, as is the case with this tweet, and talking about how they can be used as lessons or teachable moments, as the old parlance might have gone, about how you can control your messaging, what you should be concerned about, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And I think Ninja presents a very good example of what you shouldn't do. Not necessarily in the first instance, because we're all human beings and we all make mistakes and we all say silly things, especially on something like Twitter, where we have full authority to just kind of put whatever we want out there in whatever state we're in. You know, I can tell you, frankly, during the Michigan football game, when my team is getting trounced by our biggest rival, I say some things that are a little despondent. I say some things on Twitter that are maybe not the best branding for Hoeg Law, but I think it's important to have a personality, but also to think about what you're putting out there into the world at the same time. And so I don't disparage Ninja for having a personality and for putting opinions out there. But when there's silly opinions, there are things you can do and there are things you can't do. And I think Ninja is a great example of definitely remain silent and be thought a fool, and don't speak and remove all doubt. So let's take a look at this Ninja tweet. I'll never understand how college and NFL football teams allow kickers that just miss kicks. I feel like there has to be a pool of kickers in the USA that won't miss simple kicks, or snappers that won't miss the snaps. I don't know, man. It seems so silly. Would love opinions on this. And opinions he did get yesterday. If you aren't familiar with sports at all, I think you can still kind of intuit that Any kind of activity that requires the physical movement of something through space is going to have some kind of margin of error, right? We talked about extra points. Extra points are very close to the uprights. They get kicked through the uprights at something like a 95% clip. And they're still misses because even at that kind of percentage, you still have human error. You still have snaps that get dropped on muddy ground. You still have a ball that just gets mishit because your eyes and your foot don't connect with the ball exactly the way that you think they might. That's how sports works at a fundamental level. Human beings are not robots, right? You think about a golf tournament or something along those lines where you're hitting a ball and these are the best players in the world. Any given college football team doesn't necessarily have the best kicker in the world. You're talking about fielding 130, 150, 200 teams in college football, and there just aren't that many kickers that are dead on. But even in golf, where you've got the best players in the world on the professional tour, a slight miss on a golf ball puts Tiger Woods or whoever you might think is just a fantastic golfer into the bunkhouse or onto the street. Because these things are so microscopic, they're so tiny that any kind of deviation can have this big impact. And college football kicking and pro kicking, which is significantly better than college football kicking, has that same kind of margin for error. That's part of the fun of watching sports. And so Ninja put out this tweet, and he got internet slammed for it, right? He got a lot of tweets in response that said, hey, you know, that's not quite how I would describe what's happening there. Obviously, they're doing their best, and these things happen. You can't have 100% chance of success. We're human beings. Human beings make mistakes. I'll tell you right now, lawyers make mistakes. If you followed Virtual Legality, you know that the people that write statutes make mistakes. You know that commissioners that write rules make mistakes. That's just the nature of the human experience. And so someone came on here because Ninja is known for being a Fortnite player and says, essentially aping Ninja's language, I'll never understand how pro Fortnite players just miss shots. I feel like there has to be pools of pro players who could just click on their heads and hit every shot with 100% accuracy. Just seems so silly. And that's apt, right? This is what Ninja does for a living. Actually, Ninja mostly sells his personality and talking over what he's doing on the TV screen for a living, and he's very, very good at it. I don't want to take that away from him. But Ninja did what you shouldn't do in this situation. Right? If I'm talking to a client or I'm talking to you on Virtual Legality, you've put out something into the world that maybe isn't perfect. You know, Ninja didn't offend anybody with that tweet. He didn't call anybody names. He didn't have ad hominem attacks on various people. He just put out a fairly silly opinion, and someone rightfully called him on it. What you don't do is you don't double down. The best possible thing you can do is reflect on what you said, reflect on what you did, and potentially say, hey, you know what? That's enlightening. I never thought about it that way. I'm going to take that under advisement and reflect on my previous opinions. Instead, what Ninja did was he doubled down. This is the shittiest reply ever. Now, note, this is just saying, hey, Fortnite players miss shots occasionally too. He says that's the shittiest reply ever. Fortnite requires movement. Unclear exactly how football kicking doesn't require movement, but fair enough. Editing, building, rotating, and hitting the shots. There are no positions in Fortnite. A kicker's job is literally to kick. Horrible analogy, kind of embarrassing. So not only did he double down, not only did he say, hey, my opinion makes more sense than your analogy, he also implied that even having that response was beneath him. That it's a horrible analogy and honestly kind of embarrassing for you to even bring that up. And as you can see here, this was about 17 hours ago when I clicked on it. This was already losing to 20,000 likes for Ducky the Gamer to 5,000 for Ninja, although the fact that 5,000 people liked Ninja's quote here is interesting enough, right? This is the age of the influencer. This is the brand management. These are people that have these followings that will essentially just agree with whatever they say, and that's worth another Virtual Legality, a longer Virtual Legality at some point in the future. But for now, let's put that aside. He puts this out there, and instead of reflecting on what he said, instead of looking at it, he just says, you're embarrassing. And at the end of the day, he's not helping his brand, right? Above all, Ninja is a brand manager. He knows this. As I said, he's very good at it. He's probably the best at it. When he signed for millions of dollars with Microsoft, he put out a video that was essentially a fake press conference, and he got more publicity off the back of that. Then he got articles like Mixer gets huge amount of additional subscribers. Mixer is absolutely advantaged by Ninja joining its team. All of this stuff. Ninja is a good public relations person, which is why it was so interesting to see what he said yesterday. And this isn't the first time that he's done that. Now, I will say, in this modern age, in 2019, going forward into 2020, I do think, if I'm giving advice to people on what they have to put out there, I do think you need to show a little personality. I think we are well beyond the time frame where you can just be a professional services provider, whether that's legal services or whether that's Fortnite viewing services, that people want to have that personal connection. They want to have your personality. And when you go out there with personality, sometimes you're going to say things that are ill-advised. Sometimes you are going to say things that you're going to have to go into your tweets and say, you know what? I got to think about that one. That didn't exactly come out the way I intended. I can see a lot of people are interpreting it in a way I didn't mean. But obviously he did mean it that way. Obviously he did double down. And like a good public relations manager, you then see what happened as of today when I went to go make this video because I thought it was an interesting thing to discuss, is that at the end of the day, he just removed all of his tweets on this subject. And that's fair. That is somebody that's paying attention to the situation. You can see here, as of my making of this video, this tweet that we just talked about actually has 40,000 likes. And we can assume that Ninja's tweets never got up to that number, didn't have that much agreement with what he was espousing. And that makes sense because what he was espousing was so silly. But at the end of the day, you don't see an apology. I looked at his timeline. He didn't talk about this set of events in his current timeline. You just have him remove the tweets and essentially evaporate them, never to be heard from again, never to be thought of again. And I think that's an acceptable answer to this. I think that's one of the things that I would advise if I were counseling a client on a situation like this. But I would also advise, hey, saying, look, I thought about it, and the person that brought up the complaint about me playing Fortnite and that being a kind of athletic endeavor, and we can have that argument throughout Virtual Legality and throughout the entirety of all media, but it does involve physical actions. You have to move the mouse a certain amount of centimeters in order to get that hit. You have to be cognizant of a bunch of different things. It is an endeavor that at least requires a certain amount of physical movement and activity and precision. And that he should be aware that he does make mistakes, that he is a human being, and that these other people are human beings and they do make mistakes themselves. The fact that he wasn't highlights a certain amount of lack of reflection, highlights a certain amount of ignorance. And I think that's certainly something that we could talk about in another episode of Virtual Legality, about essentially the modern milieu of video gaming and influencing and what exactly is happening in terms of society and messaging when you don't necessarily have to have a background where you have been educated even on just kind of simple concepts of sympathy and empathy and thinking through things with critical thinking and logic, that we do have an entire group of people that, bless their hearts, have these personalities that people love, are making money. I have nothing against any of that. I love that entrepreneurial spirit out of a lot of these folks, but then go out there with these messages and with these concepts and then don't exactly shower themselves in glory before doubling down on their erroneous position and then ultimately just deleting the conversation like it never happened. I think if you want to do better at this, if you want to listen to an episode of Virtual Legality like this, which is mostly conceptual and not necessarily diving into the law or business outside of trying to maintain your brand, trying to increase your goodwill, you can take lessons from things like this. Look at something like this and say, hey, I could have made that first tweet. I don't blame anybody for making that first tweet. Sometimes you say things that don't make sense. But then as it goes on and you're thinking about it and other people are railing against you, and this person, yes, they're using your language, but they aren't necessarily trolling you. They're making a decent point that you say, hey, I hadn't thought about it that way. That makes a lot of sense to me. And to really reflect on the initial communication, because that reflection, that kind of concept of learning through your mistakes is all any of us can ask of each other. And that's all I would like to see more of on Twitter. I really do enjoy social media. I do enjoy marketing Hoeg Law, but also talking about things that are in virtual legality, things that are Michigan football related, things that are video game related. We're going to have a series in December about my favorite video games of the year, which I hope you check out. I hope you like. But if you don't, I still think it's nice to get out there and to have those communications with people that do find that stuff interesting. But at the end of the day, people are going to put comments into my YouTube videos. They're going to put comments on my Twitter and my timeline that are going to say, hey, Rick, I think you're stupid about point X. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm not going to ever tell anybody that they are wrong for thinking that, but I might try to better explain myself And if I don't try to better explain myself, I'm never going to have an ad hominem attack on the person that comes after me for my opinion, as long as we're not having ad hominem attacks at each other. And I think everybody can learn to do that better. And that's going to help a lot of people with their small businesses. That's going to help a lot of people that are starting YouTube channels or just being on Twitter and trying to be out there and have a positive experience. Learn from Ninja. Learn that it is better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. I think that's the kind of thing we can take from these kinds of things. I think this is not going to stop on Twitter. I'll highlight them when I think they are interesting or pertinent. I cover Ninja a lot because he is such a big mover and shaker in the video game space, and I like to think about his contracts, talk to you about his obligations to Twitch and Mixer and Microsoft and everybody else. But at the end of the day, if we can all communicate with just a little bit more empathy and really reflect on what we have said, if, again, the internet all comes down at you, doesn't mean that you're wrong. It doesn't mean that you don't stick to your guns if you really think you're right, but it does mean you should reflect on what people are saying to you and maybe at least recognize that they could possibly have a point. This has been Virtual Legality for today. If you liked it, please please subscribe. Please check out the rest of the channel. We do cover business and law and COPPA and YouTube and pop culture like The Mandalorian and other things. So if you like any of those things, I think we've got something for you. Otherwise, if you saw this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. And if you listen to it in its podcast form, thank you so much for listening. And I will catch you on the very next episode of Virtual Legality. Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel.